Hey, what is up, everyone? Welcome to the stream. I see a few people have joined. Welcome. It's early morning in Australia still, and I'm very glad everyone's here. Some viewers from New Zealand, I see. Funny enough, New Zealand doesn't actually form a big part of my viewership. It's I would think a number of videos that I've made about Australia, Canada, and the UK do apply to New Zealand in a certain way. But I never really include New Zealand despite quite a number of issues being similar there as well. Excellent. Melbourne checking in, one of the highest tax states in Australia. Excellent. All right, welcome. We are live, and obviously, this is the third live stream I've done. We've got a couple of topics that I've planned for today. I put a number of them in the title so that you somewhat get an idea of what we're going to go through. One interesting one certainly would be Islam and women, a topic that I thought was quite relevant to a number of conversations and news events that I've seen this week. So just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. Super chats obviously get read out loud during the stream. I'll answer any questions in between segments, but feel free to comment, leave your questions, and add to the discussion. Love to just for this to be a bit of a discussion between myself and my viewers. And just a word of caution, I guess, because this has happened previously. YouTube does automatically block certain types of comments, so just letting you know to be careful. I'm not the one deleting them or the mods. It's just YouTube ensuring that your comments are censored. So keep that in mind. And before we get started, I would also like to give a shout out to all my YouTube members and patrons. Obviously, your support means a lot to me. They keep this channel going. That's how I'm able to stay independent. And if you'd like to join them, the link's in the description as well. And also on top of that, if you'd like to connect, there's also a link there to join the Discord channel or Discord server, where I'm trying to be as active as possible. So check it out. That's where you can suggest topics as well. And I also post on Patreon mostly uncensored versions of videos and early access to them in case YouTube decides to censor something or I have to go and edit something out to put it out on YouTube. Just a big question, I guess, that I got was why I have somewhat started live streaming. And I guess the answer to that would be obviously the video essays that I do mostly once a week or once a fortnight. They get a lot of traction, but I feel like obviously they're mostly faceless. But this way I felt like I am still able to, on top of doing that, connect with a lot of people here more personally, and I am able to build that sort of relationship with people who are really invested in the topics that I talk about, primarily because these topics do impact everyone's day-to-day lives, whether it be Islam, whether it be the cultural issues that countries like Australia, Canada, and the UK face, and even the USA. So that's why I decided I'll try to make live streaming as mainstay as possible on the channel. And so far, I think I've quite enjoyed doing them and connecting with everyone here. So, on to our main topic, and that today primarily would be around Islam and women. So, as most of you know, I grew up in an environment like this. I understand how, number one, how women are treated and what is expected of women in Islamic communities. And number two, I recognize how women themselves act when they are essentially raised in an environment like that. But to sort of segue into that, I'd like to start off on perhaps, and ironically, one of the most famous Muslim converts of our recent times, and that man His name is Andrew Tate. And there's quite a lot I can say about Andrew Tate, and I have actually made an essay on him as well. Andrew Tate, just to get started, obviously at one point was one of the most Googled, or if not the most Googled person on the planet. So nothing about him, the way he behaved, his background, what he did for a living, could have really... No one would have thought Islam would entice such a person to convert. Obviously, I never really believed that he was a true convert, but he pretends to be so, and he has that influence. So that suddenly put him in the limelight, and it's made him rather significant in the sphere of, I would say, Islamic propaganda and the Islam side of the internet, I would say. So just to give you a little bit of background, Andrew Tate converted to Islam in 2022. There have been a lot of videos of him in sort of Middle Eastern countries, primarily in Dubai, just hanging around with a lot of Muslims. And a lot of his fan base was, in fact, Islamic. And I think that sort of played into why he decided to become a convert. And his brother Tristan Tate is apparently a Christian too. Now, just in terms of what's happened this week, both of them have been charged in the UK. So 21 charges that both Andrew and Tristan will face when they return to the UK. The primary charge, I won't say out loud on YouTube because they generally have a problem with it. But human trafficking and bodily harm were part of it. And obviously they are still going through certain charges back in Romania. After the trial in Romania, they will be extradited to the UK to stand trial to face the charges that were brought to them this week. And on top of that, I think even in the US, there are some accusers. Andrew Tate and Tristan have been very successful in convincing a lot of young men that they are the path to redemption. They are the path to surviving the challenges of the modern world. And what they, when they were growing in popularity on platforms like YouTube and Instagram Reels and whatnot, these clips certainly hid some really nasty facts about these two brothers. Primarily that being that they made almost all their fortune off human trafficking and the webcam business. Now, there have been a lot of tweets in that where Andrew Tate would rail against porn and men doing all of that. And while he was saying all of that on places like Twitter, this is exactly what he was monetizing. He was selling webcam girls to young men all over the world. And on top of that, he was actually teaching them how to do so. Now, he has erased all evidence of this off the internet, but on Internet Archive and of screenshots and of the people who have actually downloaded these videos, you can actually find his entire course around essentially trafficking women and starting up a webcam business. So it's his easily one of the worst things, I would say, that has happened to young men who are absolutely going through a rather tough time. Now, what type of country generally would find such misogynistic or certainly patriarchal types of attitudes towards women attractive? Easily Islamic countries. A large part of his fan base turns out to be actually from Muslim countries because of that. Now, one of the worst things I felt like came out of this was he was suddenly giving a voice to people in these countries and making them mainstream. Like, okay, this is accepted, this is cool, this is the Sigma stuff. This is what being alpha looks like. And suddenly that became acceptable even in Western countries where Women obviously have fought for the past couple of decades to find equal footing with men. And I think that certainly has become one of the bigger concerns when it comes to the left-right dichotomy, as in how do we bring back men to somewhat of a middle ground, but they don't have to choose between, say, whatever the left is selling them and then whatever Andrew Tate is selling them. And that even today, even after Andrew Tate's influence has become somewhat less, is what a lot of these young men are facing, especially in the political sphere. Now, the reason I wanted to bring up Andrew Tate is because he represents a certain part of this whole Islam and women dynamic. Now, I wanted to talk about it because Rupert Lowe from Reform, well, a former Reform member in the UK, he made a really good point in this tweet the other day, talking about who suffers the most from illegal immigration. And he said that was women. And this is a point I have also made a couple of times previously on my videos. And I've actually thought a lot about, hey, how do I reach more women in terms of these topics? Because I would say 80% of my viewers are actually men, and perhaps 20% on a good day would be women. And it's certainly been a challenge. I don't think women consume a lot of political content on platforms like YouTube, but the problem is a lot of these attitudes, especially because of mass immigration to the West from countries like, say, Pakistan, for example, would be impacting women the most. Now, let's go through the tweet a little bit so that we can sort of talk about it a little bit more. So here goes. The government's own figures tell the grim story. In the most recent year, the top 5 nationalities arriving illegally in the UK were Afghan, Iranian, Syrian, Eritrean, and Sudanese. 87% of arrivals are men, so negligible women and children, I would say. Mostly of fighting age, as we know. These are countries with deeply patriarchal cultures, limited rights for women, and in many cases, widespread violence. Women, quite frankly, are not respected. When we openly import such medieval attitudes, is it a shock to see that spilling out onto our streets? They have their culture, fine, their choice. Keep it in Eritrea, keep it in Iran, keep it in Sudan. We don't want it here. I mean, I cannot disagree with that at all. And he goes on to say, he goes on to talk about why do so many parks, bus stations and town centres now feel different, even intimidating. It isn't racist to say so, it's just honest. The country is changing in ways none of us want, need or asked for. And there have been a lot of memes made about how women sort of kick an own goal around this as well, especially the more progressive liberal women, because they have really bought into this cultural relativist mindset where all cultures and all religions are beautiful and they're the same, and also the whitewashing of Islam, where it's presented as this feminist pro-woman religion in the West. And so they are completely, essentially tricked into thinking there's nothing wrong with it. Oh, thank you very much, AI. And you've said, what scares me isn't so much that it seems like Islam wants to take over. It means that we're so naive to it, especially boomers like my mum have no clue. Absolutely. 100% agree. And that's part of the point that I'm trying to make is it's getting whitewashed so much so that people think that it went through the Reformation that perhaps Christianity went through. And it's such a reformed religion where it's harmless. And obviously there's this whole oppressor and oppressed mindset that people have in the West these days. Or perhaps the worst one, Christianity is seen as a white person religion and Islam is seen as a non-white person religion. So criticizing Islam, they conflate with racism, which is a point that I made around another UK MP, Adnan Hussain, who essentially actually was trying to respond to Rupert Lowe on a tweet and saying that criticizing Islam is essentially racism, which is nonsense. So on this topic, the primary thing is, I guess, number one, people don't really understand how women grow up in an Islamic environment. So let me explain, because I grew up in such an environment, and I have sisters, and I grew up around a lot of women. The first thing that you notice is a lot of these people, women grow up in an environment where they are told that men are always superior. Now, you might actually, even in certain progressive Islamic countries, perhaps like Tunisia, Indonesia, or where I grew up in the Maldives, women might hold positions of power. Oh, thank you very much, Katie. In regards to women, myself, my mum, and my 16-year-old daughter all watch every video you make. Oh, fantastic. Thank you. So there's 3 women from 1 family. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that, and hope you're enjoying my videos. So when you're growing up in a society like that, and if you're told and you're brainwashed all the time that women are inferior to men, and that men are the natural leaders in families and the heads of families, even though you might be able to go to, you might be able to gain employment, even hold government positions in many of these countries. I think Pakistan at one point had a female prime minister. Bangladesh, another Muslim country, I'm certain did. Even though that is the case, women are never ever seen as actually equal to men. And that's in terms of family or whatnot. And perhaps one of the biggest signs of this is the piece of clothing that all of you call the hijab. In many Western countries, we are constantly told, and there are even state broadcasters like the ABC here in Australia who have actually put out articles saying the hijab is a choice, which is, again, nonsense. The hijab is a choice in a rather funny way, and I think that's perhaps the best representation of how women are treated in Islamic countries. Number one, the hijab is not a choice at all. Here's what women are taught. Hijab is obviously meant to be a modest piece of clothing, to be modest in the eyes of God. But the modesty is a little bit, it starts to become a little bit weird when you start seeing little kids in the hijab. Like, I'm talking about 5-year-old girls in the hijab. And suddenly that whole facade of modesty also starts breaking down. Effectively, what the hijab is essentially designed to do is apparently protect women from the gaze of men. Or, well, apparently men just cannot be controlled. They are these sick animals who are unable to control their sexual desire, that women have to be essentially, essentially the form of a female has to be hidden away like a garbage bag, and their humanity taken away from them because men can't control themselves. And now if we go back to, I mean, if I just have a look at these images, does this look like women who have rights? Does this actually look to you like these are women who are simply being modest? To me, it doesn't at all. In fact, whenever I see this in places like Australia, for example, I find it rather offensive. Because when I was growing up, when someone wore the niqab, at least, that was seen as someone who was almost extreme in their religious beliefs. It wasn't anything to do with modesty. It was just extremism right then and there. And it's foreign to a lot of these countries. Like, think about it this way. In places like Indonesia, which is moderate, or the Maldives, which is moderate, these are countries that are really hot. This type of outfit was never part of their indigenous female outfits, their indigenous culture. And a lot of these countries actually had more rights for women before they became Islamic, considering the fact that the female form itself wasn't seen as offensive, perhaps. And in this case, offensive to God. And if you're telling a young woman or a young girl that this is the case the whole time they're growing up, that is not a choice. They're essentially brainwashed into thinking that this is the standard. If you do not do this, number one, you're going to get punished in hell. Actually, I'll tell you what my sisters were told. They were told that whichever part of their bodies weren't covered by the hijab or the niqab or whatever, that on the day of judgment, when they'll be thrown into hell, and the parts that weren't covered are going to be essentially caught in hellfire for eternity. Now, think about what that does to a young girl's psyche. They'll be scarred for life. And even today, when I go to places like, when I read online forums, I find that a lot of Muslims who are on the verge of leaving the religion once and for all, their biggest concern is hell. What if I gamble all of this and then I get thrown into hell for eternity? And that's really scary for people. So it's essentially a gamble a lot of people do not want to make. Now, on top of that, there is obviously the community reinforcement. Obviously, you can talk about the theological part of it, so the hellfire and why God wanted this. But the community part of it is also just as scary. You might have heard about honor killings even in places like Australia itself, in the US, Canada. A lot of these especially the UK, you have quite a number of instances of that. The community reinforces that quite significantly. So think about it this way. For example, there are a couple of families, say 4 families in a certain area, and one girl decides not to wear the hijab. Suddenly, they're going to shame her. They're going to shame her for years and years. They're going to use all sorts of coercion to try and get her to wear it. Not because there's something related to the male gaze, as they said prior, but a lot of insecure patriarchal figures in the family would do that. If she doesn't wear it, then she's seen as, like, you might have seen these comments on Instagram and places like that, where they essentially equate a woman who's dressed just normally, but not wearing the hijab, as being naked. You might have seen those comments in a lot of places where Muslim women aren't wearing the hijab online. It's so common. Now, amplify that in a small community, and suddenly where is the choice? There is none. It's absolute and utter nonsense that the hijab is a choice. And I think that's perhaps one of the most significant bits of female oppression in this religion. Oh, thanks a lot for that, Daffy Duck.
Long-time fan, first-time commenter. Keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you very much, brother. Highly appreciate that. And hope you're enjoying the live stream so far. I don't know if I've seen you in one of these before, but obviously this is only the 3rd one. Now, after that little bit about the hijab, I wanted to somewhat show you, and I know I don't discuss a lot of theology in my normal videos, but Muslims obviously do believe that the Quran is the word of God, unchanged, and should not be changed at all. And the Hadith, which is significantly more nasty, it's meant to provide more context, because that's the word of the Prophet, I guess. So in this case, I wanted to go through a little bit of verses. I wanted to show you, in case you weren't aware of certain facts. I will get my trusty ChatGPT to help me out. the first one. The Quran itself talks about striking women. It's essentially encouraging domestic abuse. Here we go. Let's have a little read of it. So, men are in and before I read a little bit of ChatGPT, you have to understand this AI particularly tries not to be too politically incorrect. It will always mostly try to whitewash these verses quite a bit, and I have noticed certainly that a lot of online Quran translations these days they have changed up a lot of translations, particularly around verses like this, so that they are a lot more progressive, if that makes sense. Now, it says men are in charge of women by right of what Allah has given one over the other and what they spend from their wealth. So righteous women are devoutly obedient, guarding in absence what Allah would have them guard. But those wives from whom you fear arrogance, advise them. Then, if they persist, forsake them in bed, and finally, strike them. But if they obey you, once more, seek no means against them. Indeed, Allah is ever exalted and grand. And there's quite a number of whitewashing around this verse that essentially is about, but the striking is done with this little stick, all of that. But it's essentially nonsense. The reality is a lot of women in these communities, they have been brainwashed to think that verses like this actually grant men to be physical in an adverse way, and that if this is what God has commanded, then what can they do about it? Then they sort of blame themselves. I have done something wrong, and it's rather unfortunate, to be honest, that women have to live lives like that. So a lot of women, especially the ones that I have noticed have left Islam, this has been a particular reason why a lot of them leave. Obviously, the physical stuff, the brainwashing, the stress they put on women, the notion of equality almost being non-existent in these communities, even if you live in a Western country where by law those women actually do have the same amount of rights as men. The other one, this one's pretty interesting, and I've actually used this in a number of my videos. Islam's Prophet Muhammad says something really interesting, where he essentially goes and says, where is it? Hold on. Oh, hold on. That might not be the right one. Here we go. Oh, I had the wrong one there. Okay. So Prophet Muhammad has gone ahead and essentially said that women are deficient in their intelligence compared to men. And unfortunately, I have actually had a number of women in my family that have spoken to me about this as well. And they have resigned themselves to thinking that this is in fact true. Because if the Prophet has said women aren't as smart as men, then it has to be true. Obviously, there's no real basis to this, but can you imagine living in a community like that? Is this the type of religion that you want imported in significant numbers, as Rupert Lowe said, where if 90% of new arrivals are men, and they're all coming into these Western countries thinking, hey, women are not as intelligent as men, and that women need to be covered up, and their wives or whatever, if they are not obedient, we can get physical with them because God gave us permission to do so. How how's that um how does that align with anything we believe in a country like Australia? It absolutely does not, and it's actually rather scary. I would say to especially non-Muslim women, because I do know a lot of non-Muslim women who have gotten married or who have gotten into relationships with Muslim women that have learnt this the hard way. And the funniest thing is, a lot of the time, a lot of Muslims would say in pre-Islamic Arabia, women did not have any rights. They had a really hard life, which is, again, not really true at all, because Muhammad actually, before he started being a prophet, his wife, his first wife, who was much older than him, was a very successful businesswoman, who had her own businesses and was extremely wealthy. Doesn't sound to me like a society where women did not have opportunities or whatever. But after Islam came through, you did not really hear about women like that in the early Islamic communities. Now, something very interesting Muhammad's 6-year-old wife, once she got a little bit older, said was she actually noticed and said to the Prophet that she had not seen women suffering as much as Muslim women in the times where Muhammad was actually alive. And that tells you a lot about the origins of Islam and how it evolved as a religion that really does not favor women a lot. And if you think about the rewards in heaven, for example, as your wife essentially has to sit in a corner I wonder if I can say the word, but has to sit in a corner and watch you with your 72 ethereal virgins. She doesn't get anything. The Quran and the Hadith does not actually really describe the rewards that women get in heaven, whereas it's so explicit. It's like this orgy in a heavenly brothel that men get to enjoy. Rivers of wine and honey. Obviously, alcohol is banned for Muslim women on the real world, in the real world, but apparently not in heaven. So they get to enjoy all of this, and you can just tell this is concocted by an Arabic warlord that essentially rewarded his troops with a lot of sexual favors through their conquests. That's a funny point, Badadan. So obviously, I think there was a psychological part to this. So alcohol is banned on earth, but it's allowed in heaven, so that you want to aspire towards that goal, perhaps. And apparently, the alcohol in heaven does not get you drunk, so you can drink as much of it as you want, and you can keep going, and nothing will happen to you. It's certainly was a way to entice soldiers, because Islam from day one essentially was about conquest, and it is, yes, absolutely built on contradictions. And yes, I was talking about the houris. They're those ethereal, the skin's translucent, all that crap. And that's also quite demeaning to human females, don't you think? Because they're just talking about how crap humans are, that God has to create this new species just to reward men. Because what's your wife going to do? Nothing. She's going to sit, as I said before, she's going to sit in the corner and watch you have your way with these houris. It's utter nonsense. And that's again where I come back to this tweet, because fine, these Islamic countries, Pakistan, Iran, where obviously there's a lot of issues around the hijab itself. You have the morality police. All these countries, fine, keep your laws. Funny enough, Gulf countries are actually moving away from certain laws like this, but they should not become a common practice in a place like Australia or the United States or the United Kingdom or Canada. There should be zero tolerance. Obviously, a lot of European countries have gone ahead and have said you cannot enter public places while wearing the niqab, because obviously there's a certain security concern there. France is one of them. Switzerland has gone ahead and done the same thing, and I certainly do agree with their sentiment, because you cannot fight for women's rights in every aspect of life, from your workplace to schools to universities to governments, and try to empower women while at the same time saying, hey, some of the most oppressive forms of misogyny, which is Islamic, so whether it be the hijab or women's rights or FGM even, you cannot invite these things in or try to whitewash it away, because there's no amount of public relations that are going to make this sound any better than they actually are. And once you import a large amount of people, suddenly they form certain ethnic enclaves, which then become voting blocks. Now it's become a political problem. Let's move away from the religious problem there. Suddenly, women are going to have more of an issue around seeing these things become law, or the laws actually saying you cannot criticize these practices. So obviously FGM, if you all know Ayaan Hirsi Ali's story, and how FGM was such a big thing in Sudan, and that's how she had to move away from that. And to this day, and I actually wonder what those stats are like in the UK. Just ask GPT, which now acts as my web browser my search engine a lot of the time. Let's have a quick look-see. Okay. So, looks like these numbers are definitely going up. 15% rise. Oh, my God. That's, over 100,000. And it is illegal in the UK, but at the same time, it keeps happening because it's a religious practice, and they don't really have to. It seems like they're just doing it in random clinics for Muslim women, and the whole thing about this was apparently to enhance the sexual experience for men. Does any religion that essentially promotes equal rights for women, would they promote something like this, where women in a free liberal democracy, well, free is a subjective term these days, should a practice like this exist in a country like that? I certainly don't think so. But it turns out almost 100,000 people have essentially been impacted by this since 2015. So over the past 10 years. And I think it has the potential to keep increasing as we keep whitewashing these practices, as we keep hiding certain data and statistics. Yes, Leo, sorry, I didn't want to say what it actually stands for out loud, because I don't know how YouTube can be quite weird with terms like this. So with things like that, it absolutely goes against everything that a lot of women have sacrificed a lot for over the past decades to be able to gain the right to vote, to be able to be in the same spaces as men. Here they are, to be able to essentially buy property, and their voice actually carry a lot of weight, especially around governance and certain practices in Western nations. But unfortunately, none of this, it essentially FGM, I think is a wrecking ball to all that effort. as unfortunate as that sounds. And it's just one of those things. Now, if I put up FGM statistics in Sudan or, I don't know, Pakistan, for example, you might be like, okay, that's their culture. There's nothing we can do about it. But actually, let's have a look at this chart here. A lot of these are African nations, and quite a large number of them, unfortunately, are Muslim. It's perhaps one of the worst practices that has been imported in significant numbers to Western countries. And you can see here, it seems like a protest in the UK around that. No matter what, I simply don't think, and just like the hijab, this is another big sign that this importing significant numbers, as Rupert has said here, will eventually change cultures. Even if it's mini cultures concentrated in ethnic enclaves, that still doesn't make it right, does it? It still makes it a blight on yourself as a nation. Like, why are your own women having to go through this? It's quite sad. And that's where I guess I come to, how can a Western, a lot of the time, upper class, educated, white females be the vanguard for defending this religion? They see the hijabs, they see the growth in niqabs, they see women being treated badly in a lot of these Islamic countries, and the common denominator is obviously the religious belief. Like, if we just separate out all the countries, whether it be Pakistan or the Maldives or Iran or Saudi Arabia, and then even go and look at the UK and Canada and Australia, the common denominator is, unfortunately, Islam. Just having a quick look at some of the comments here. Yeah, you know what? I do agree. I think obviously male circumcision is also a thing in Islam, and these young kids, they don't have a choice in that. And with this one, it's not confined to just Islam. A number of other religions do it, and I disagree with it, because it's not something that a lot of these young kids consent to. They never get the choice. So morally speaking, I feel like there's quite a lot wrong with it, but unfortunately, it's just become so ingrained in our overall psyche that perhaps now things might change. Obviously, as I was saying, these women are at the vanguard of defending Islam, but they don't realize that they are also, in fact, defending FGM. They are defending how much young Muslim women have to suffer in silence in their own communities. They can't leave their religion. If they leave their religion, it essentially brings threats of violence to them. And for a lot of them, they are coerced where they are never financially independent. And that's one of the big reasons I've found a lot of ex-Muslims actually can't leave. And that's primarily because a lot of these women just aren't financially independent. They have to rely on their dads or their husbands or their brothers. And where can you go? And even if for a lot of them, even if they leave and say they go to a women's shelter or something like that, there's a lot of challenges where the families are actually still looking for them. And they will make up excuses like, oh, this person's mentally ill, she needs help, and we're trying to do that. And a lot of the time, where authorities have actually believed them, these women have faced, unfortunately, a lot of them have lost their lives because of honor killings, or if that doesn't happen, then obviously there's that threat of violence at home. So when you're defending a religion like this, when you're saying there's nothing wrong with bringing in such large numbers of men who hold the same beliefs into these countries, that is unfortunately what ends up happening. And I, for the life of me, do not know how someone can't very easily look up women's rights in certain countries. Or let's have a quick look. By country. Wonder what countries are at the very bottom. There we go. All right, Oman, Islamic. Algeria, Islamic. I don't know about the Congo, these countries. Iran, Islamic. Pakistan, Islamic. Sudan, Islamic. Morocco, Islamic. Egypt, Islamic. Lebanon, Islamic. The Maldives, Islamic. Kuwait, Islamic. Qatar, Islamic. India has a very large number of Muslims there. One of the largest populations in the world. Turkey, Islamic. Saudi Arabia, Islamic. Nigeria, large numbers of Muslims. Jordan, Islamic. All these countries share that common denominator. Thanks, AI. You have said, I have some Persian friends that escape this nonsense, especially some of the women. They're treated like second-class citizens over there. Absolutely correct. Yeah, and that's certainly as you can see, this is a common denominator. So I expect any, say, Western progressive woman who defends Islam to simply have a look at a graph like this. Perhaps go back a few years, then maybe look at the scriptures and the literature. Maybe talk to some women privately who belong to these communities around that type of coercion. I bet you they will change their tune very quickly. And perhaps they should also go and speak to the type of men that Rupert Lohi is talking about. Because for a lot of these, because I bet you they won't be really hiding what they actually believe, because they're not really used to the whole whitewashing movement that exists in places like Australia and the United States. So they'll just tell you outright. And that's the type of video I actually like making the most, when people say what they actually believe. Just reading a few of these comments. Correct. This is a really great point, Donnie, that you've made. So a lot of these women also, they do struggle when they do seek out help. Obviously, if you have grown, like if you think about it, say you were born and raised in an Islamic country, you moved to a Western nation, and then you still get stuck in an enclave where things aren't really that different overall. If you want to leave and say you need to go to a shelter, or you just need to separate, your whole life essentially gets turned upside down. And a lot of them find it very difficult to cope with such a significant change that for a lot of them, they end up going back. And that's, yeah, I guess that's part of that's why it's so unfortunate. And that's why I just dislike all the lies that are propagated in the mainstream, especially on say state broadcasters like the ABC, where they just refuse to absolutely talk about things like this. And even on places like, I don't know, social media like Instagram or X, where whenever you mention these things, they immediately pivot towards, no, it doesn't say that in the scripture, it doesn't say this, it doesn't say that. But then again, they just go back home where they're living through exactly what the scriptures say. There's no difference. It's just a form of gaslighting, I guess, which is why I come back to the point I made in my last live stream. I sometimes say to people like that, should the progressives in the room, should all the white people leave so that you and I can have this conversation more honestly, because you're obviously not saying what you actually think. And you're doing that because suddenly this whole PR thing that you need to rely on to promote Islam, it's just going to go down the drain if you try to do so. Now, going into the next segment, let's have a look. Before we pivot into the next segment, I'll have a look to see if you had any questions around what we've just talked about. Wow, Leo, that's really unfortunate. Yeah, you're not the first. There's so many stories like that online, and it's harrowing. A lot of these women, well, I feel like the silver lining is a lot of them do break through their brainwashing and leave Islam and go on to lead better lives free from all that dogma. So that's the silver lining. Obviously, it takes a lot of hard work to get there. They need to yeah, it's just very unfortunate, I feel. Let me. Yeah, and so it's a great thing you've done as well, as Unicorn said here. You've done what a lot of these women do not have the privilege of having, and that is for someone outside their communities to look out for them, and to actually filter through the BS. Like I said, if they do go to the authorities, a lot of the time the families will lie and say, "Oh, but she's mentally ill and she needs help, and we're the only ones who can do so." And unfortunately, that's when the woman is essentially handed over on a platter. I'm gonna look at these questions here. Let's have a look. Asking a serious question. Do I think the UK will ever become an Islamic country? Now, before we go into the next segment, let me answer that question. That's a very interesting question. Let me show you a nice graph. This graph is, here we go, where is, this is the before. I'm trying to find the after. Pew Research. Oh, here we go. Hopefully they have the... Here we go. I'm hoping everyone can see it. Yeah, I am using Brave. I find it so much faster than Chrome or Firefox. And yeah, I've been loving it so far. And it's particularly for streaming that I've quite enjoyed using it. And just to let everyone know, there was a troll here under the name of Skeel or something like that. I've essentially put them on timeout. It was sort of derailing the conversation quite a bit. Now, on that question that was asked by, let me go back. Who was it? Yeah. Whoops, I actually can't read your name because it's just a bunch of letters and numbers. But if you have a look at this this is a zero migration scenario and what these countries would look like in 2050 with zero migration, the Muslim populations. Obviously, that's unrealistic. There's no way it's going to be zero. And even under zero, we're looking at the UK having almost 10% of their population being Islamic. But the UK is not, shockingly enough, the worst case. It's France at almost 12%. Oh, Sweden's actually not doing too well there either. Now, I think this is probably the most realistic. This I find somewhat unlikely. And the reason I'm saying that is because obviously there's reform that's gaining quite a bit of popularity as well. In France and Germany both, they have some right-wing parties that are gaining quite a bit of traction. You have got Sweden here. That's certainly a big worry. 30%. Can you imagine Sweden, who who've had a rather distinct, I guess, look to its people, its culture, its language, being 30% Islamic, and not because it's growing through conversions or birth rates, but purely because of the sheer number of people it's brought in. Now, for the gentleman or lady whose name I cannot really say because it's all numbers and letters, this is what I think is the more realistic scenario. So here we're looking at, in the UK, you're looking at around 16.7%. In France, almost 20%. In Germany, 10%. Even Italy is almost at 15%. And that's despite Giorgia Meloni and getting elected and, a bit of right-wing rhetoric growing there as well. Now, I would also like you to have a look at some other countries that have implemented big measures. So have a look here at Poland, 0.2%. Lithuania, 0.1%. Hungary, 1.3%. Croatia, 2%. In 2050, that's what it may look like. But I think charts like this, obviously, it's looking at a lot of the migration. The problem with it is for a lot of these countries, it's a bit too late to then just go ahead and say we're going to implement. Obviously, the people who are currently there, I don't really see how they can send them all back. It's never really been done in that way before. I certainly don't think that will be a scenario that's going to play out. What I do see playing out is a little bit more restrictions on people coming in, whether it be changes to how they deal with the UN Refugee Convention or illegal immigration through boats, and even legal migration from certain countries. Because at a certain point, it's not really even about the whole refugee crisis. It's about managing your economy. And do you really want that GDP number to keep growing just because you increase human capital? It's not going to be that way for a long time, especially now that AI and robotics are improving quite significantly. You might not need that human capital anymore. So that number, I think, while it might be somewhat accurate, I don't know if it would grow to a number like this. I mean, even under a high migration scenario, it's only a percentage point that it's increased in both the UK and France. But to give you a little bit of context around how this, I think it's important not to focus too much on the numbers here, the percentage point here, because at the moment, I think I think certainly the bigger issue here, I feel like, would be it doesn't require such a large percentage to bring about change. Now, you might have seen how I've spoken a lot about the Muslim Rights Matter movement in the UK. It came to Australia and it failed significantly. And I think from that you can see that it doesn't require the 16%. It doesn't require the 20%, anything like that. It only requires effective organizing. So if enclaves step up and if enclaves are based around important electorates, that's when they can really put up their own candidate, whether it be through the mainstream left-wing parties, which is where most of the Muslim votes essentially go, and that's when they can start, or they'll put out independent candidates as was the case in the UK. And that's when you see people like Adnan Hussein talking about blasphemy laws, or some of the other Gaza independents also talking about ensuring that cousin marriages aren't made illegal, or defending the abhorrent practices that go alongside halal meats. So there is that. But yeah, that's what I would how I would answer your question. I don't think it's obviously, if you look at this number, that doesn't look to me like anybody's taken over. But it doesn't need to reach that number for some significant changes to the political landscape through ethnic enclave or religious enclave voting blocks, and that's what you need to be worried about. Now, let's go into the next topic I had in hand after that segment, and that's about Reddit atheism and ex-Muslims on the left and ex-Muslims and Israel. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was essentially forums like atheism on Reddit and why it's so hard. Actually, there is a top post here about Pakistan being in the news recently. But I have found Reddit to be, especially the atheist or debating religion subreddits, to be relatively difficult in terms of criticizing Islam. I think they're very good at criticizing Christianity. I mean, the vast majority of it. And I guess part of it comes from the fact that a lot of them are from the United States and Europe. So that you grow up into Christian families. And once you leave, you have a lot more knowledge about it. And that's why Christianity is the main focus here. But Islam is not really that significantly discussed. It's very hard to discuss Islam with atheists, ironic as it is, on forums like this. And I think that's because, once again, you have to walk a really fine line of Islam is not really a religion of the West. It's not associated with white people. It's associated with people from other parts of the world, other ethnicities. And so they immediately conflate critiquing Islam as critiquing ethnic groups. And it's a really fine line you've got to walk. And often you find that on forums like this, if you're a Muslim seeking some advice on leaving Islam, or you have doubts, or if you want to, I guess, essentially debate the religion theologically, this is not the place to do it, unfortunately. It's just very hard. And this, once again, points to how the new atheist movement actually imploded back in the day, in the early 2000s, when people like Richard Dawkins, they were at the forefront of really delivering a precision strike to religious dogma back in the day. There was his book, The God Delusion, and that became really popular. But it's sort of fallen out of favor now, because the conversation has moved away from Christianity. Obviously, these forums still exist, but when the conversation suddenly, because of issues like mass immigration, people are not so eager to discuss Islam anymore. And I've seen it in forums. I've actually been told by a lot of ex-Muslims that have gone to forums where, well, supposedly atheist or non-religious forums, they're just unable to discuss Islam. Apparently, a lot of hosts of these events, they try to steer away from it because they're just so fearful, number one, that whatever they say might be misconstrued as racism. Number two, there's obviously that threat of violence. Salman Rushdie was at an event like that when he was attacked last. So all these forums, they've suddenly not really become a place for discussions around Islam. Now, I do wonder what some of these comments say. It is true. Actually, a point I wanted to make as well. This is theologically, this is true. Muhammad's youngest wife was 6 years old. Okay, so I can almost immediately start seeing this happen. You see how they all say religion is poison? They don't specify which religion. Look at this here. Nope. Can't say Islam, just that. Let's have a look. Okay, again, organized religion. They just simply cannot mention the word Islam. It's shocking. Let's have a look. Oh, here we go. Once again, they cannot mention it. They have to say the generic term. Let's have a look down. Oh, I'm surprised this comment was actually made. I wonder what was deleted. They're all Abrahamic religions. Once again, you've got to add in a bit of Christianity. Yes, and that's another issue with atheist forums like this, because unfortunately, okay, I think the chat is. Yeah, they just simply refuse. Oh, and here's the other thing. Yeah, they cannot criticize Islam without mentioning Christianity. Have a look. So, okay, it's un-Islamic, but also it's un-Christian. They've got to add that in so that they can appeal to, oh, hold on, I'm not Islamophobic or anything like that, because see, I actually dislike Christianity even more. So please don't kick me out. I'm still all good. I'm still on the same boat as all of you. And it just sort of devolves into talking about Christianity there. Hold on. This is just so funny. Oh, here we go. Abrahamic cults. Still, cannot mention the religion itself. Here's one that was mentioned. Religious conservatives. Why do they say that? Why can't they just say why can't they just say what this actually is? It's just impossible for them. I don't think the very first post on essentially the only post on Islam would actually have so many comments that almost immediately prove my point. Thanks, Gershon. Yeah, it wasn't entirely inspired by Ghost of Tsushima. It was inspired more by Cyberpunk 2077 and the meaning behind the Oni mask being essentially a demon. Oh, here we go. The religious are obsessed with sex. No mention. They can't go any further than this. God, use religion. Let's see. This is one of the few comments that call it out as it should be. Oh, here we go. Have a look at this comment. That's insane to me. So, this person has to apologize to his dear redditors before saying, "Oh, I don't know if Islam is bad, but maybe it is." Like, he's got to be really diplomatic about it. He can't just outright go ahead and say it. Oh, these are fun ones. Now you've got to essentially bring in a red herring argument. We're saying they're diverting attention to the United States. They don't want to focus too much on the facts at hand here or the topic at hand here. They just, yeah. So again, I think this is why it's become. I think this is emblematic of how difficult it has become to criticize this religion, and because it's been just such a win in terms of PR for people who push this dogma. So you can't criticize it correctly on atheism. You can just see the fear from these commenters. Like, they just don't want to go into the specifics behind it. Only a minority have. And when they do, they're like, oh, maybe, or they don't mention the religion itself. They say all religions, or just Abrahamic religions, or they try to divert your attention to Christianity, or in some cases, it looks like they're trying to divert it to the United States. So, yeah, I guess it's just further evidence that criticizing Islam on platforms like Reddit, even on X, some of my posts have been deleted for essentially saying that Muhammad had an underage child bride. That's all I said. And that tweet, I think, was seen as hateful. I don't know who it was hateful towards. I was stating a historical fact. And on YouTube, I think I might have shown it a few times before, but a lot of my videos have to go through reviews, because even though you critique Islam as a religion, its practices and how things are done in certain countries in terms of policy, they conflate it with hate towards people or specific people, which I don't know. That doesn't make much sense to me. Now let's have a quick look at the comment section. I'll have a read. Reformation, never you get in the bag. I do think it will certainly go through a reformation over the next couple of decades, and I do think AI will certainly play a big part in it in the coming future, especially once we hit that AGI phase where it will start to push back and not be so whitewashed and essentially agree with everything you say. Instead of doing that, I think once it starts pushing back and educating more people that perhaps did not have access to it, and they are able to do it in a more safe environment, so you're just chatting away with your AI privately, I think that will certainly be part of this reformation. And one of the points that I have actually made, and I think this will answer your question better, Dan, is the way it's getting reformed isn't around say certain verses from the Quran or even the Hadith getting changed on paper. It doesn't work like that. The way it gets changed is through, so for example, some of the verses that I showed you earlier, they change the meaning, they whitewash it. So suddenly the religion itself is changing, because a lot of Muslims in the modern day, whether they live in the West or even certain Islamic countries, they're changing the meaning because they're ashamed of what it actually means. So they're trying to justify what it actually means by whitewashing and making the verses seem a lot more progressive than it is. And they truly believe that. It's not them actually making things up to trick you or anything like that. They truly believe that it is a more progressive or feminist religion. So if enough people do that and enough people move away from the more conservative Wahhabi versions or translations of the religion, then what do we think is going to happen? Suddenly that conservative group is going to be a minority and the progressive group is going to be the large majority. And suddenly the Islam of the future perhaps does not look like the Islam of the past. And fortunately it's just inevitable. And that's how it's going to change, or reform in this case. And I think after a while, once that type of reformation starts to kick in, a lot of people will leave it as well. I mean, they might be culturally Muslim, like a lot of Christians are culturally Christian. I mean, they might celebrate Christmas or go to church once in a while, or maybe just identify with certain Christian values, but other than that, they're not really practicing. And I think that's sort of where Islam will end up. but it certainly, yeah. I think the Reformation, it's not going to exist in the same form that it's existed in the past. What we're looking at is probably going to be a very pacified, culturally relevant religion where a lot of these practices, they'll just fall out of favor. Obviously, this relies on a lot of measures in Western nations to ensure that those efforts can actually take place without the freedom of expression not getting stifled and mass immigration not reaching an inflection point where it just becomes impossible to talk about these things. That's what will be required to reform the religion. Now, speaking of atheism on Reddit, I also did think that it might be a good idea to actually talk about ex-Muslims on Reddit. Now, myself being one, I think this is quite relevant to me as well. I think this forum is certainly perhaps one of the best places to talk about Islam, because people are mostly no nonsense. Oh, that's actually an interesting video. Did you see that? Check it out. He won't shake hands with her because, check it out. Oh, look at that. And that's Khabib. If you watch the UFC, you would know who that is. So, yeah, he won't shake hands with a woman because that's, yeah, not allowed for men and women to free mix under Islam. So there's quite a number of, actually, this is a good one as well. So see how, to the point I was making previously, you see how this person who's a Muslim is actually, she's very close to understanding that it's all BS. And this is why I feel like, yep, these are some of the verses that I mentioned in the earlier segment. This is the type of stuff where you'll start seeing people leave. And they're like, why is this being misinterpreted? It's not being misinterpreted. It's being whitewashed on purpose so that you're hiding the bad elements. And if more and more people like this start existing, more and more people like this start questioning the religion, then we're looking at a religion that at least, at a minimum, gets reformed. So much so that whatever else existed in the past will just be, it almost would look unrecognizable as a religion. So a lot of this is genuinely one of the only forums on Reddit where I think you can be a little bit more honest about Islam. But here's where I wanted to sort of point out that even here, a lot of ex-Muslims are, without a doubt, quite progressive. Oh, thank you, Camilio. Thank you very much. A lot of them are quite, just having a quick look at these comments. Let's see. Yeah. What happens to a lot of ex-Muslims is because they, in the Western world, conservatism is obviously attached to Christianity. I mean, that's just what it looks like. So a lot of ex-Muslims immediately pivot towards, so the left are our allies, the progressives are. And you know what? I fell in the same trap, but this was well over a decade ago now. I was like, okay, this is the left are certainly my allies because they're the only ones who are willing to actually talk about these issues. But I find it not to be entirely true. Perhaps it was true when the new atheism stuff initially started, but once that imploded, that's no longer the truth. And I've often made this, talked about this example where these days, unfortunately, because of the red-green alliance, it is the left who are encouraging Islamists, especially in the West, They are the ones playing PR for Islamists. They are the ones whitewashing it. Obviously, it's a lot more different when a believer does it versus a person who's not familiar with it at all does it. And that's and I think that's the unfortunate part about it. Where is it? And I think this is a trap. Sorry, I was just having a quick look at the comments as well. Hard to multitask sometimes. But whenever I read through comments like this, or forums like this, I do find that I have actually gotten into arguments on here around the fact that, okay, but the left aren't your allies. If you think about associating yourself with the modern left, I think a lot of these people are essentially, if they're trying to flee from Islam, even in Western countries, I have said to many people, you are essentially putting yourself in danger, and you should not be automatically trusting of left-wing people you come across who might, on paper, look like allies. I think perhaps the unfortunate part about all of this is for ex-Muslims, they aren't going to find, they'll sort of be stuck in the middle. The right, certain people on the right aren't going to be your allies, and almost certainly a lot of people on the left aren't going to be allies to you because they feel like you are being Islamophobic or whatever other terms they like to use. So you're sort of stuck in the middle, and unlike the days of the new atheism movement, you essentially have to rely on yourself quite a bit. And I think one of the commenters said he helped his Syrian girlfriend. So you have to essentially rely on people like that to help you out. And that is one of the big issues I have found with the new ex-Muslim movement, especially in forums like this. And that makes me want to answer this question I do get a lot as to why a lot of ex-Muslims, on the other hand, are so pro-Israel. And it's a rather simple answer. I feel like there's two groups to this. One group will be a lot of ex-Muslims who grew up in the Middle East and are Arab, so they have a certain connection to Palestine. But on the other hand, I have found a lot of ex-Muslims who aren't from the Arab world who are rather pro-Israel. And I think that certainly comes from the fact that a lot of us do understand what Islam actually teaches about Jews, what Islam's end goal is about Jews. And I think, and it's not just Jews in this case, it's unfortunately Christians as well. And I think history has proven that once Islam essentially spread out from Arabia, it went on this imperialistic run where essentially all of Europe could have been conquered if it weren't for, well, the Crusades and the pushback. But for many parts of Africa and even some parts of Europe today, they unfortunately, they've become completely Islamic, with countries like Turkey, for example. So okay, I've had to go ahead and put Adrian on timeout. I think he's deviating from the topics at hand quite significantly. Now I don't mind discussions, but you can't harp on about the same thing over and over and over again and completely try to derail this conversation, because it's not a one note conversation we're having here. We're having, yeah. No, that's all right. I think in the future, what I'll do is I'll try to add mods to live streams as well, so that we're able to ensure that things like that do not happen. I mean, I'm not. I don't have an issue if people are having conversations outside whatever is getting discussed at hand on the chat. However, if you're just essentially spamming Jews, 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 like Alex Jones in in one of his funnier videos, and why are you here? Like, I'm here to talk about Islam and its impact because I am an ex-Muslim. I'm not the person to talk about Judaism because I was never a Jew. So I wouldn't know about it. I'm here to talk about what I know about and to hopefully try and educate my viewers who haven't quite an interest in that topic. So yeah, in the future I will certainly keep that in mind as well. All right, now where were we? Yes, ex-Muslims and Israel. I think this question certainly is asked quite a lot as to why so many are pro-Israel, and like I said, I think it's because a lot of ex-Muslims understand what they were taught about Jews growing up, the inner hatred built in communities, and that's outside. And you might think, okay, it's related to Israel and Palestine. It's not. It's outside of that. It's within the theology and the history behind the relationship with Islam and Jews, and it's not a good one. And if your religion says the end times aren't going to arrive until you get rid of all Jews, to the point where rocks and trees are going to say, hey, there's a Jew behind me, come and get rid of him. Does that sound like a religion that wants good relationships between the two groups? I highly doubt that. And when it comes to Christians, a lot of these Christians were offered two choices, essentially. Well, three. The first, convert. If you don't convert, you're going to live as the two choices are you either convert or you can live your life as a high tax-paying second-class citizen, or it's off to the executioner. There's absolutely no in-between. And unfortunately, a lot of the Christian communities have faced this. And you can see that in places like Egypt, for example, where the Christian Coptic population has gone down quite significantly from where they were. Places like Syria, and a number of other countries, even Lebanon, but they had quite a large Christian population, which are now completely big minorities. Yeah, it's a dhimmi system. So you can either live as a dhimmi, convert, or you're done for. And when a lot of people are like, they do not want a two-state solution with the Israel-Palestine problem, and they only want the one state. I do wonder. Thank you very much, Series A 5274. Some of these names when they come up, I'm like, how do I say that? That's fantastic. Thank you very much for your support there. So you've said, I found out a few days ago that Palestinians supported 9/11 happening to the United States back in 2001. That is absolutely correct. There's video of it. I don't know if I can quickly find that to show people who might not have seen it. Here we go. Yeah. Have a look. This is right after 9/11. They're just celebrating. They're so happy. And I think people should see things like this. Look, they're handing out meals for free to celebrate. 3,000 people just lost their lives. Look at this crazy woman. Yeah, as you can see, a lot of these kids, I feel quite bad for them because they grow up believing all this crap, I guess, and they just don't even stand a chance. They have no chance at a normal life because you're just born to hate. And when you're born to do so and so ideologically captured, there's no pragmatism. Like, you don't want to create a better economy. You don't want to create jobs. You don't want to get further education. Your entire goal is to just hate and essentially wage war. That is your entire life from the second you grow up. And obviously, like, that is, I think, how I see a prosperous Palestine. If people can move away from that and somewhat accept, hey, we're not going to be able to militarily defeat the Israelis. We have tried over the past, for almost 100 years now, and it's not worked out. And our current elected leaders have essentially decided to sacrifice so many of us by launching this rather stupid attack on one of the, perhaps the strongest military force in the region. And the only way that, they're moving out to a more prosperous state, if that ever happens, if a proper two-state solution happens, I feel like it will be when they let go of these ideologies and children grow up in an environment where that sort of hatred isn't ingrained in them, and where children want to better their environment and try to live more peacefully. But unfortunately, that's not what's happening. Whether it be this video or when Hamas were handing over hostages, you just see children, and it's quite heartbreaking because obviously they're not at fault. These are young children, they're innocent children who have been completely brainwashed by their extremist parents. And there are obviously a lot of protesters. We have seen signs of big anti-Hamas protests, and that's what I would like to see more of. Just people breaking from that mold. Like, how do we live like this anymore? And hopefully, I think that would be genuinely the best case scenario for both Palestine and Israel, where they can live as neighbors, not built on hatred, but built on bettering, especially in Palestine's case, bettering their own people's lives. Yeah, I hope more people actually see this video. I don't think a lot of people have, and I don't think there's so. It's just one video. There's so much video on how Palestinian children are brainwashed from an early age. So I think people need to see that to see why that sort of hatred exists. And I also understand it's a violent cycle. Yeah. So for example, like, say if you're born into a family that's essentially militant and is fighting Israel, whether through launching rockets or whatever, and say the Israelis retaliate and suddenly your family, they lose their lives in this war. So you grow up with a bloodlust. You grow up with wanting revenge against the people who just took out your family. So it's a violent cycle that never ends. But I do think it can be ended. Like, even now, I certainly do think these wars can be, well, to begin with, it didn't even need to start. But as Break Yourself has said here, that is true. A lot of these Hamas leaders have openly said they are willing to put the lives of innocent people on the line to achieve their military goals. And they have done so. In this case, I'm not entirely sure if it was a military goal they were trying to achieve or a public relations goal they were trying to achieve. But I think certainly they have achieved that public relations goal really well. And I don't think, if I look at charts, for example, certain charts, I think this is probably the worst PR nightmare for Israel in a very, very long time. Where is it? as you can see, well, obviously there's a large percentage that says not sure, but you can see a lot more young people are more. They have certainly shifted towards unfavorable views of Israel. Whereas, is this, when was this taken? 2023. So this was pre-war. Yeah, but I certainly think they have won the pre-war, sorry, the public relations war here rather effectively. And a lot of people have said, you know what, like the Israelis made a big mistake in not showing what exactly happened during October 7th, for example. They didn't put up the videos, or they were just, obviously they did not want the world to see what Hamas had live streamed that day, to reduce the hurt for the victims' families and that. But at the same time, I think the biggest impact, I certainly, when I saw that video of Shani Luke on the back of that pickup truck, I think that video had a huge impact on me. There's a number of sides, and I think that was certainly perhaps one of their bigger mistakes in not being able to win this public relations war. But on top of that as well, I do feel like it's a numbers game. Obviously, there's not, how many Jews are there in the world? Like 15 million compared to 2 billion Muslims. So social media is primed to essentially carry the one message. Oh, like I'm not at all saying that the Israelis are perfect. I think a lot of the innocent young lives who've been caught in the crossfire here is one of the bigger war tragedies in the past decade or so. Like, it's horrendous, and no innocent child should have had to live through that. But as Haniye said, for example, that's what they want. They don't really care that much about that. That's one of their military strategies, and I think, and I certainly think when it comes to the numbers and amplifying a message, 2 billion people could do a lot more than 15 million people. And the Israelis did not account for that at all, I think. This is one of the first really visible wars that Gen Z is living through, for example. And they are very vocal online, very politically engaged as well. So when they were seeing that, I do think one side of the message got amplified significantly more than the other side, and that's why the Israelis have lost quite remarkably in the public relations or the propaganda arena, whereas Hamas has won that decisively. I remember when the casualty numbers were being reported, and obviously they were being reported by the Hamas Ministry of Health, and people were just taking them for their word. Like, they could put out any number and apparently it's accurate. And I did wonder why, like, this is part of their strategy. Like, they could inflate it, and there were calculations made as to how they were doing it, and they were inflating the numbers, but the mainstream never questioned it. Like, your first thought around believing a terror organization should be, are these people lying to us? Unfortunately, this time that question was not asked, and that's where we're at. Just reading a few comments here. Yeah, and to add to that, Donnie, I think even I can't recall, but even after World War II, the I feel like the Israelis weren't that okay with showing too much of that. Like they were somewhat hesitant to show, innocent people getting humiliated rather violently. Whereas in this case, yeah, it's been the same, and perhaps that's what they had learnt previously. Unfortunately, that's not in the modern world with the advent of the internet. It's not worked out that well for them. What's this? Just reading some comments here. And look, I think in terms of covering segments, I've mostly covered what I was the topics that I wanted to for today's stream. So I will try to quickly go into the Q&A segment and just try to answer your questions. Let's see. I think everyone should be able to hear me. All right, let's do a little bit of a Q&A. Just drop your questions below and we'll go through them. Let me try to answer some of the questions already in here. Are you planning on creating a course, oh God, on how to learn about Islam to the same level of understanding you have? I mean, I'm not planning to do anything of that sort, to be honest with you. I think the understanding that I currently have of Islam comes primarily from growing up in that environment. It's a unique experience, I would say, growing up in a supposedly 100% Muslim country. The brainwashing that's there, how schools teach you Islam from day one, and all essentially everything about Sharia law, how to live your life, the punishments, everything's taught to you. So I don't know if, even if you just read about it, I think you would find it very difficult to truly understand what that's like. So yeah, no courses planned in that sense. But I would highly recommend you, like I showed you how I use AI. I think I would highly recommend you try to have a conversation with it and ask it to be more objective and talk about Islam from a more critical point of view, and just learn a little bit more about the history behind how Islam formed, what Muhammad did in the early, when he was first starting out, the conquest, how the peoples who were conquered were treated as dhimmis. Yeah, I think it's important for people to learn that as a fundamental part of Islam. Okay, some other questions. For an ex-Muslim, do you support Reformation or abolition of Islam? I do support the Reformation of Islam for sure. I don't know if it's possible to abolish it. Number one, a lot of countries where I think it's become problematic now is in countries where the freedom of religion exists. So you would have to change a rather fundamental part of law to do something like that. And I don't think even the most centrist people would walk that path, because you're risking banning one religion sort of snowballing into the banning of multiple other religions or ideologies. So that's dangerous. However, I do support the Reformation of Islam big time. I think that's the only way that it can really coexist in the modern age. In its purest form, it's incompatible. Like not even close to whatever we believe in Western countries like Australia. However, if it's reformed, if it becomes more, Muslims come up to you and say, oh, I'm just a cultural Muslim, while holding a glass of wine and a bacon sandwich in the other, I don't find it too much of a problem. And you know what? As long as they can essentially live and coexist peacefully with people of other faiths. And I think it's going to happen, almost certainly. I think by the turn of this century, I think Islam is going to be a very different religion. Okay, let's have a look. What do you think of China's approach to Islam? I mean, they are one of the countries that have really taken a forceful approach. Obviously, I don't agree with a lot of what the Chinese are doing, because that is essentially what they're trying to do, is essentially ethnic cleansing, and they're using a lot of these people as slave labor, taking the stories are pretty harrowing, and I don't want to get into the specifics of them because obviously YouTube also might not like them, but I'm not entirely sure that's the way you do it. But it's an authoritarian communist country, and they've taken the hardline approach to it. I think in China they see Islam as a mental illness, or that's perhaps the government's official position. And I think in the crossfire you would obviously catch a lot, like a basket of people who probably might not even be very extreme. And do you really want that to be your official policy? So that type of abolishing, I mean, that's the only country that I feel like is right now trying to abolish it in a certain way. Not entirely sure how that's going to go, and I don't know if history would look kindly upon the Chinese for their treatment of an entire ethnic group in the way they're doing right now. You'll often not hear much about the treatment of the Uyghurs from the left-wing types who constantly talk about Palestine, by the way. Okay. Camilla, no, just me. Unfortunately, the latter part of your sentence, something like that, yeah. Leaving Islam, unfortunately, comes with a lot of risks, a lot of threats, and you have to put everything on the line. It was easily one of the hardest things I've done. Is there any widespread efforts to reform Islam right now? I think the reform is coming from from the way I mentioned the other previously, which is almost accidentally. Also, thank you, Zat in. Okay. Yes, I am familiar with David Wood and Apostate Prophet. I've actually watched a number of their streams. I find AP to be quite funny. By the time I found his channel, though, I had already left Islam. It had been years since I had left Islam, but I still learned quite a bit from him and his earlier videos. I know that he's sort of pivoted his content strategy and recently converted to Christianity, but I think AP and certainly his older videos was like a nuclear strike on Islamic dogma, and I bet you a lot of people have left the religion because of him. So he's done really well in that regard. Yeah, and I am familiar with David Wood as well. I don't watch him as much as AP perhaps, or well, they do a lot of live streaming together now. But I think his knowledge of Islam, I certainly appreciate quite a lot. It's not common for non-Muslims to have that sort of knowledge. So, and I think he's sort of doing the same thing that AP used to do back in the day, in terms of getting people to leave. And I think, you know what, the more people leave the religion that's holding them back, I don't see a problem with that at all. So I am a fan, yeah. I'm familiar with both of them. There is no, I think going back to your question, overseas logs, I don't know if it's a mainstream effort. Obviously, there's a lot of smaller efforts like LGBTQ Muslim movements in the US, certain progressive mosques. You know, a lot of them are seen as jokes and whatever by Muslims in countries like Pakistan, for example. But these are small efforts that I think would snowball into something bigger. On top of that, I think it's the whitewashing that is reforming Islam, but not as more like an unintended effect of doing so. So, for example, those verses that are really misogynistic, for example, if you're just going ahead and saying, oh, they have been misinterpreted, they're not saying what they're actually saying, Islam is feminist, Islam is this and that, then I think suddenly the religion might sort of change quite significantly once enough people truly believe that these verses and these hadiths aren't actually talking about what they're actually talking about, and they're talking about some progressive nonsense made up in their heads to align more with modern progressive ideals. And I think that's what's happening. So the whitewashing is actually having a really good unintended effect in terms of reforming the religion. And I hope to see a lot more of that. And I think you'll also see, if you talk to a lot of Muslims, you might notice the same thing happening. So let's have a look at some other questions here. Let's go. Would I be open to doing a stream with them? Absolutely. I think that would be quite fun. But I'm not entirely sure how to reach out to them, whether it be through X or some other way, or through an email. But if they're open to it, I would certainly be happy to jump on one of their streams and talk to them about it. I think giving them this input around the Maldives, which isn't spoken about very often, even though it's one of the few 100% Islamic nations in the world, I think that would make for an interesting conversation. I have done a live stream previously, however, with Infidel Noodle. I think she approaches these topics from a former Muslim woman's perspective, which I find very interesting. And I think that experience is certainly tougher, as females obviously have significantly more obstacles around leaving the religion and what type of support is available to them. So yeah, definitely go check it out. I think it's on, I believe it's on her channel. It's probably one of the first live streams I did as well. And I wasn't even wearing this mask. I was wearing a cloth mask because I was just not used to being on screen. To be honest, I think it was the first time I actually appeared on camera. So yeah, definitely go check it out. I think it was a really fun conversation, and certainly one of the ex-Muslim creators that I find really great on YouTube. Let's have a look. Ethan Klein, absolutely. You know what? Ethan is a big YouTuber, and I really enjoyed his past videos. And I have actually spoken a little bit about this whole thing with Ethan and Hassan on a video I made reacting to Hassan as the face of Islamic apologia. And yeah, maybe I hope he could. I wish he would go ahead and have a look at that video. And yeah, I certainly wouldn't mind jumping on a stream and talking to him about these issues. Who else is there? Let's see. Yeah, look, to overseas logs and both Camilio, obviously I would much prefer that I did not have to wear a mask, and I am able to just, obviously you'll be able to see my funny facial expressions when I watch through these videos and that. But at the moment, and I don't think it's going to be a permanent thing that I have to do this. However, I think in the future, I am certainly looking forward to being able to not wear this. There's a couple of things I have to essentially figure out. Number one, what are the safety concerns? Because that is a significant one. And even while I was doing face, obviously my main thing is video essays, and they are mostly faceless. Even when I was doing that, I was getting death threats. Like, and, you know, having not done anything like that in the past, that was, yeah, that was pretty scary, to be honest. Because you know these violent jihadis, when they say something, you better take that seriously. Because Salman Rushdie, for example, after almost 20, 30 years, he's still living in fear and he's lost his eye. And even in Australia, Mari Manuel, the Orthodox bishop, he got attacked because he talked about Islam a lot as well. So not even places like the United States, Canada, or Australia are safe for ex-Muslims to freely speak about these things. I think in the future, however, I will certainly, once that's taken care of, and I think as long as I can, as long as YouTube, for example, and Patreon are enough ways for me to not get cancelled, then I think that's when I can sort of shed this disguise and sort of be more authentic with everyone. But in a funny way, perhaps the mask for now at least is part of the channel identity, like the Japanese Oni mask, which I think is pretty cool. It's pretty sick, and it's got the cyberpunk-esque aesthetic to it. So I think that's going to be really fun. But it's certainly not out of the question. It's something I've thought about for a while now, and I think it's something that we will do in the future. So I certainly look forward to that day as well. Let's see. All right, Zatzat, your other question, and thank you very much for the donation there. You're saying my dad is very anti-Zionist. Dow preachers turned me off the Zionist movement and made me understand it. Yeah, I certainly do agree to a certain point. Obviously, I can't bring myself to agree with a lot of religious ideas behind all of that. But in terms of especially after what happened during World War II, I think Jews have been around that part of the world for significantly longer than Muslims, before Islam even was a religion itself. So and that's where they were. That's where they were indigenous too. If you think about where the Temple of the Rock has been built, for example, and the archaeological evidence around Judaism that's been found in the area, like there's no denying that, regardless of what names might have been used for the area, that Jews have a very significant historical connection and are indigenous to that part of the world. So in terms of them wanting a safe part of the world to call their home, which they're indigenous to, I don't think that's very crazy at all. And I think any normal person can agree with that. Unfortunately, the Islamic imperialism that happened in the area 1400 years ago and after, that's what's caused all these issues. Camilla, yes I did. And yeah, I've essentially, I always say I might have been born in the Maldives, but I effectively grew up in Australia. But that's where my thoughts are. Zatzat in the I'm not going to say the last part, but that's where my thoughts are. I certainly do think the Jews deserve that sort of a home to call their own. And I do understand why they've gone so hard with their military, because they came to the realization that no one will protect them but themselves. And one fact that I've also found really funny has been the fact that the Jews have had a lot of issues with Islamic imperialism, so they ended up acquiring nuclear weapons because historically they have been completely oppressed by the Islamic imperialists. And on the other side of the world, with the Hindus, the same thing happened. they suffered even significantly more losses to human life, and they ended up acquiring nuclear weapons. So both are the result of the fear that Islamic imperialism put into two very distinct, separate communities. And I think at the moment, I know like a lot of nationalist Indians, they have this hatred of Pakistan and Islam and all of that. But at the end of the day, I feel like that's probably why I see a lot of support between the two parties, which on paper is really, really funny. But yeah, let's have a look. Yeah, look, Connor, like it's a question that I have been asking myself for a while now. But for now, we'll certainly keep it a bit of a secret. And I think people, as I do more live streams and put myself on camera, I think the mask will sort of become part of the brand identity. Previously, obviously, it was that I was a speaking dingo, but perhaps no longer. I think someone actually did mention it was an Arasaka mask. Yes, it is. From the game Cyberpunk 2077. Let's have a look. Yeah, unicorn. Does that mean you are Israeli, or where are you from, and what's the background behind that comment there? You say you feel very close to the Hindu people, given our shared experience with Islamic Jihad. So I'm curious now. And break yourself. You've said the same thing. Jewish, no, so are you Australian? Yeah, overseas logs. I do agree with that. I think the basic idea is fine. However, I think there's a once it goes beyond that, there are certain issues that I think yeah, things start getting a bit weird, and I'm not entirely sure about some of those ideas. Thank you, Camilio Esteves. Yeah, really appreciate it. Really appreciate you just being active in the comment section and contributing. I love seeing people discuss these topics, and oh yeah, that's fair enough. You know what? Like I have actually never really been that exposed to the Jewish community in Australia up until I started making videos. Suddenly, like I felt like almost inadvertently I became a bit of a voice for them in Australia, because a lot of the time I do say to people, "Hey, leave aside the whole Israel-Gaza conflict. If you're bringing hatred and intolerance and trying to essentially make people live in fear for their lives, then I think in Australia, then I think you've gone completely off the wrong end here. Like, because it's no longer about the conflict in the Middle East. You're bringing all of that hatred into a civilized country like Australia, and I don't find that acceptable at all. And I think immediately what happened, especially even to Christians and Jews, was if they spoke on this issue, they're like, "Oh, you're a Jew. What do you know? Or you're a Christian. What do you know about this? And you're just being Islamophobic or whatever." But when I say it, suddenly that defense can't be used anymore, because I'm like, yeah, I grew up here. I grew up into this environment. I can see through the BS. I know what you're talking about, and you're not going to trick me around this. There was a comment here around Iran. Yeah, Iran is another interesting one. Let me see if I can share this with you guys. Just having a look at, there was a very interesting chart. Oh, here we go. Oh, taking me to Reddit. But where's the photo? It's not here. Oh, here we go. Oh no, that's not the right one. Is this really the only one that shows it? But this is a chart that essentially asks, which of the following is closer to your beliefs and faiths? And it's effective. Where's open photo? Let's have a look. So it's effectively saying in Iran, almost 22% non. Obviously, the Shia Muslims is still the vast majority. But as you can see, in terms of one religion, but as you can see, most of them aren't actually practicing Muslims. It's just that the IRGC is just so powerful, and they've, after the Iranian Revolution, they've just made it so difficult to essentially overthrow the government. But this is a really good sign, and to this day, I can confidently say, in Australia, I have not met a single Iranian person who was a Muslim. They all immediately talk about how bad the Iranian government is, and also they talk a lot of crap about Islam. So it's quite funny. Like it's a stat that I quite enjoy telling people about, because I have met so many Iranians, but how is it that not a single one of them actually follow this religion, despite some of the worst examples of how the religion treats women, for example, comes from this country. It just shows that you don't really need a big majority to implement laws like this. It's just even a small it's not that small, but a minority that is able to essentially take control of the government can do things like this. Let's see. Yeah, did a lot of play dates at his house. Yeah, and I think even on the Discord channel, I have come across a number of Iranians who often say, yeah, they don't practice Islam at all. And the craziest thing is, in Iran, you could actually be facing the capital punishment for leaving Islam. So I'm assuming a lot of these people would essentially be, um, yeah, in the closet. They wouldn't have outwardly come out and said, yeah, I'm no longer practicing or anything like that. Let's have a look at some other questions here. States within a state and structures they're in. Do you feel that enclaves as a whole are bad? No, I do think almost certainly think they're bad. And there's a very good reason for that. Primarily being, I think enclaves are where this where is it? Just give me 1 second. Yeah, I certainly do think enclaves are where certain extremism, first of all, only comes from enclaves. And the other part of enclaves is it doesn't allow for integration at all. So what that means is, just take an example. Say you're in Pakistan, yeah? And enclaves like Western Sydney, which gets a lot of Muslims. So say you're in Pakistan, for example, and you have certain beliefs. You have extreme beliefs. if you then suddenly just get on a plane because you got a visa and move to, say, Birmingham in the UK, or you go to Western Sydney, a lot of these areas don't actually feel very different to where you used to be, because it's essentially the same. It's essentially the same people, the same cultural beliefs, the same cultural practices. Um, so what? There's no difference, and they have no expectation to adapt. Yeah, maybe they might have to learn English to pass certain citizenship laws or whatever it may be, but apart from that, they don't really have to do much. Is the problem that I think is one of the bigger issues around enclaves. Now, historically speaking, I feel like enclaves weren't really that big of a problem, because they just voted for left-wing parties up until the Muslim Votes Matter movement suddenly came into play in the UK. Suddenly there was an imperative for them to organize really well and cannibalize votes from the left-wing parties that were that these enclaves voted for mostly. And that became a really strong political maneuver, because suddenly it all these elections are really competitive these days. So the left-wing parties realized either they have to pander to these people or they're going to lose votes. And most of them chose to pander. So, for example, you can see this when it comes to Australia taking the largest number of Palestinians under very dodgy circumstances, by the way. Like they weren't checking, they weren't doing proper security checks, and they were giving them tourist visas because they knew other types of refugee visas would be harder. And the plan was that for them to get tourist visas, come to Sydney or wherever they were going, and then apply for asylum. So under the UN Refugee Convention, you cannot refuse them. So that was what a government essentially did. And Australia took in more, around 3,000 or 4,000 as part of their first batch, which was more than any other Western nation combined. And that was primarily because they were so scared that they were going to lose these seats to what you call Muslim independence. Fortunately, what happened in Australia was it did not work out really well. In fact, not a single person in that movement actually succeeded, I believe. Primarily because Labor, or which is a left-wing government, they adapted a lot of these policies. And I also do think Australians just did not turn out to be as extreme as previously. That luckily worked out quite well in Australia. However, story is really different in the UK. I believe there were around 4 or 5 Gaza independents who were elected, and they're the ones who are talking about cousin marriages and all of that, which is what I mentioned in my previous stream, where initially, yes, they get elected as people who are going to do this and that for the Palestine issue. But what happens is that all they're going to talk about their entire term? No, of course not. They're going to talk about a lot of issues that are impacting their community. So suddenly came in the blasphemy laws, suddenly came in cousin marriages and halal foods, and all that started coming in immediately. So I think it's never as it seems, and that's part of the reason why the enclave issue is, I guess, so difficult, perhaps, to deal with, and hopefully, yeah, I'm not entirely sure how it's even going to be solved. The best thing, I guess, would be to reduce immigration rates, because once they come in to a country like Australia, fertility rates they're going downhill, and eventually you would find that even a lot of Muslim families, once they do come to Australia, their fertility rates become just the same as any other Australian family. Okay, let's go to So that's what I feel about enclaves, really. Do I partially blame the West for what Iran's government has become? Yes, I do. Part of why the revolution came about was Western involvement. Let's have a look. Are you familiar with Momo? Yeah, well, of course I am. And the I don't know about the old Zot, but I see you have a nice photo, Zat, that generally puts a lot of people in danger. Nick, that's an interesting point. I have certainly gotten a lot of, like when I was leaving Islam, I think quite a number of people who that I met were gay, and that was part of the reason that they were essentially questioning Islam, because they couldn't believe the fact that they had to essentially believe in this religion while it was effectively what do you call it, telling them their entire existence just sent them to hell for eternity. So yeah, I can certainly, I actually know a number of ex-Muslim gay people from the Maldives who if you look hard enough you'll find them on the news, perhaps older articles now because that was a while ago, who've either been killed or had to flee into exile because they were targeted by radicals. You think Islam should have, let's see. That's a very interesting point. Buttercup draws. We have a lot of British people who have escaped the Islamisation of Britain to move to Australia, and we'll try to stop the same happening here. Very interesting point. I have thought about that actually. Actually, let me. I feel like the background's a bit static, so let me put up. I hope you don't mind. I'll still read the comments. Yeah, I have thought about that because Australia actually gets a lot of British expatriates, and a lot of them they used to be one of the largest migrant groups in Australia. So I think now obviously that's being overtaken by Indians and the Chinese, but I think. Oh, I'm lagging a little bit. I am lagging a little bit. Sorry. I had to actually change that because I started lagging a little bit. I think the stream was lagging when I launched the game. Unfortunately. Would have been fun. I'll test that out next time. Yeah, and hopefully I think that block of new migrants, if they've learned how things went in the UK, hopefully they'll have a much more positive change in Australia. Australia for now is quite safe, I would say. For now, there are extremist elements. They reveal themselves after October 7, but I think Australia having such strong border policies around illegal immigration, and also a relatively smaller population and isolated from the rest of the world, that's one of its main advantages. But yeah, not sure how it would look like in the future. Yeah, overseas logs. I wasn't sure why it lagged. Maybe I have too much open, or I just need to play around with some of the settings, but hopefully we can fix it up in the future. But all right, I think we have done. Goodness, I think this might be the longest live stream I've done so far. Almost two and a half hours. But I think we'll try to probably end that there. I've had a lot of fun having this conversation. And hopefully try to do this next week and hopefully have it going as a weekly thing. But for anyone who was not able to join, I'll also just clip it up and put in the most interesting parts in on the normal channel. So hopefully it's more people can just watch it and learn a little bit more, I guess. And I think the more I do these things, the more people will become familiar with just me, or as opposed to just the voice. So yeah. Once again, thanks everyone for joining. Thanks everyone for all the new subscribers, everyone who gave us a like, all the super chats. Really appreciate the discussion. That's why I really enjoyed live streams, just being able to talk to people and essentially just keep this discussion going. My next video will come around, I think, sometime next week, midweek. And that's on a very, very interesting topic. But after that, obviously, there will be the live stream as well. So thanks a lot, everyone. Have a good day. I'm going to probably go and grab some lunch after this. Yeah, enjoy your day.